Hello everyone, Colin Canet here for Woodwork Web. Today we've got something different for you. Today we're going to do an interactive video, and what that means is we want you to comment on this video. And here's why. I've been given a challenge. I've been asked to repair two of these RV doors that are not very well made. And I know what I'm going to do with them, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do to fix them, but we'd like to know what you would do to repair these, so we want you to write some comments on what you would have done to repair these doors, or if you liked what we did, you can comment on that as well. So let's give you some close-ups of these doors so you can see what the challenge is. Now here's the first door, and you can see there's a gap in here, and there's also another gap down in here. So these two pieces are literally pulling apart. Let me show you the second door. The second door is got one gap up here, and you can see how big that is. It's huge. And I think you can actually see when you, with my hand through there, that there's nothing in there, and I'm going to show you a close-up of why this split. These are not really good, really well-made doors, and they are from a recreational vehicle. Okay, here's what we're working with. There's the gap, and you can see that gap goes right through. So what that means is there's no other way of fastening these two sides. There's the rail and the stile, as it were, and what they used are just these two mechanical fasteners, and they're like a staple. We'll rotate that around a bit so you can see that. There's nothing in there except those two mechanical, there you can see those two metal staples, slide staples in there. And what I'm going to have to do to start with is pull these out, and in a second I'll show you how I intend on repairing this and what my solution is. Okay, there's the edge of the door, and you can see clearly those metal fasteners in there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use needle nose pliers or something and just pull these. These should be able to pull out, but you can see there isn't even any glue. They didn't even glue these. There's no glue in that hole at all. But what I'm going to do is pull these metal fasteners out and allow these two edges to come together, and then I'm going to go to my table saw and I'm going to cut a slot in here to insert a spline. Now this is just a piece of veneer, and this one's not thick enough, but basically once I cut a slot in there, I'll be able to insert a spline all the way in there, and then of course that will be glued in there, and I think that will give that a nice repair job that'll last for a long time. So that's my plan. I'm going to show you now what the jig looks like for cutting splines. So this is my spline cutting jig, and it will go on the table saw, and it's just that wide. This wood here will ride against the top of the fence. This bottom will ride against the side, and the blade will cut up through the center in here. And when I'm cutting these splines, when I remove some hardware from these doors and allow them to sit in there, basically this will just run through the table saw just like that, and it'll cut a little slot in the edge of that. And I've already tested my slot. I've used the blade and I've cut the slot, and I've actually made some material that is just wide enough to snugly fit in there with a little bit of glue. So the next thing is we need to do, take the hardware off this, and then we'll move over to the table saw and start cutting some splines. Okay, here we are 24 hours later, and I need to update you on what I've done so far. Now, as you recall, there's mechanical fasteners in all of these corners, and this one here I've actually glued these two pieces together, and I've actually had to use epoxy because it's end grain to end grain, and that's all that would hold it. Now, these mechanical fasteners, I was hoping that with some needle nose pliers I'd actually be able to pull those out, but I could not pull those out. In fact, these mechanical fasteners were so thin they tear. They're about twice the thickness of a piece of paper, so they're very, very thin, but they did snap off. Then I had to use a Dremel tool to kind of grind it down in there so that I could get a nice tight finish. So where I'm at now, this edge is glued, but I wouldn't trust it, so I'm still going to cut the splines in the end of this. And I have all of these corners are all tight now, so I can now go ahead and put those splines in. Now, just to update you on what I've done, I've actually taken a piece of scrap wood and just cut a slot in it with the blade I'm going to use to make the slots. And I've actually, on my jointer, I've actually taken a piece of straight grain oak and I've just cut it down so that it fits just snugly in there, enough to get some glue in there. And this is what I'm going to use. This is what I'll cut the splines with, and this is the material that I'll use to make the splines with. Now, off camera, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut some little wedges in there, and you don't need to see that because it's pretty easy stuff. So I'm going to go ahead now and cut those little wedges, and we'll start cutting the splines, and we will show you that. I have my jig set on the table saw, and it's just going to ride against the fence. So the height's already set. I've taken one of the little wedges that I cut off camera, and these are going to be the splines that will fit in the corners. And I've actually measured that from on top here. So now I have, that gave me the height of the saw blade. The next thing I did, I just had a little piece of scrap wood, and I measured that against the edge of the door, and I used that to set the blade against the fence so that I now have the height of the blade set and I have the depth. At least I think I do. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to run a piece of scrap wood along this, and I'll check that against the door, and we'll see how close that spline, the cut, is to what we want in the door. There you can see the cut that I've just made right there, and the depth in, and that's actually just about perfect. You can see it comes almost right in the center of this, the height of this from here to here. So that's perfect. Now I'm just going to go ahead now and cut all of my slots that the splines will go into now. Just so you know that when I start cutting this, you may see some sparks coming out, because remember, there's that very, very thin metal mechanical fasteners in these, and I may strike one of them, or I may edge up against one of those on the way through. So if you see some sparks, that's all that is. there's the slot that I've cut in all four corners of both doors. And now all I need to do is put a little bit of glue in there, and I just have a very thin piece of veneer, and I just put a little bit of glue on that and ease that in on both sides. Then I'll put a little bit of glue on the spline itself. Make sure that we have glue all the way on all of the surfaces on both sides. And this is designed to stick out a little bit, so we'll cut that off after. And that'll just fit in there, just like that. And that's what that's going to look like. Now I just need to do that on all four corners, and that'll give us a really tight, a really nice joint, so that joint won't come out. So there's the finished spline, and that's already inserted and glued in that door, and that's been allowed to sit overnight. And now the next part is to trim the sides of this off and to make it flush with the door. So this concludes the video on repairing this RV door. Now this actually took me 2 days to complete, and I think it could have been done in 1 day. You know, it's a fairly simple repair, but because I cut splines and I had to wait for the glue to dry, now I still have to trim those splines and make sure I don't want to damage the edges of the doors, so you know, I've still got a bit of work to do. So now the challenge with this video was for you to tell us what you would have done, and I wish I'd know that ahead of time, because it would be lovely to know what other people would do to do this. Is there ways that you could have done this repair in a day and got it out of the way? So write your comments underneath, because we'd all love to hear other people's ideas on how you would have repaired these RV doors. So I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching, and we're looking forward to your comments.